My name is Rabbi David Cohen. For 35 years, I have served my community in Brooklyn, New York. On the evening of December 10th, 2024, during our synagogue's Hanukkah celebration, I died for 11 minutes. What I experienced during those 11 minutes has shattered my peaceful, academic understanding of faith and compelled me to share a warning that will likely cost me my reputation. But after witnessing what awaits our world, beginning in late 2025 and escalating into 2026, I can no longer afford the luxury of silence. For 3 decades, I have served this congregation with unwavering dedication. I have taught Torah at our community center, written articles on modern Jewish ethics, and guided countless families through the joys and sorrows of life. My colleagues on the rabbinical board respected me, my congregation loved me, and my family was proud of my work. I was content in my understanding of God's covenant with our people, secure in my faith, and certain of my place in the world. But everything changed that winter evening when a massive heart attack claimed my life for 11 minutes. What I saw during those minutes defies everything I thought I knew about reality, about God's plan, and about the catastrophic events that will soon unfold. The evening began with joy. Our synagogue was filled with light and laughter as we celebrated the Festival of Lights. I was speaking with a young couple about their upcoming wedding when suddenly, without warning, a crushing pain exploded in my chest. The last thing I remember was the flickering lights of the menorah seeming to spin and blur as I collapsed to the floor. My wife, Rachel, found me, and the paramedics later told her that I had been clinically dead for 11 minutes before they managed to revive me. But during those 11 minutes, I was more alive than I had ever been. The moment my consciousness left my physical body, I found myself standing in what I can only describe as a place between worlds. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an energy I had never encountered, and I was surrounded by a light that was somehow both brilliant and gentle. That's when I saw him approaching. Even before he spoke, I knew who he was. His presence radiated a love so profound and a wisdom so ancient that every fiber of my being recognized him immediately. This was the Messiah, the one our people have awaited for millennia. But what shocked me to my core was that he was not what I had expected. "Rabbi David," he said, and his voice carried the weight of eternity within it. "I have brought you here because time is running short, and my people must be warned of what is coming. You have spent your life serving God faithfully, but now you must serve as a witness to the truth that will save many from the darkness ahead." I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by his presence. Every question I had ever wrestled with, every doubt I had ever harbored, every theological puzzle I had tried to solve suddenly became clear. This was not just a spiritual figure or a metaphor from our teachings. This was the living God himself standing before me with eyes that held both infinite compassion and urgent concern. "My son," he continued, "what you are about to see will be difficult to witness, but it is necessary. The time from late 2025 into 2026 will bring trials to this world, unlike anything humanity has ever experienced. Wars will rage, nations will fall, and many will lose their faith in the darkness that comes. But those who understand what is truly happening will be able to stand firm and help others find their way through the chaos." The scene around us began to shift, and suddenly I was looking down at the earth from an impossible height. But this was not the earth I knew. This was the earth as it would be in the coming year. And what I saw filled me with terror. The first vision showed me the Middle East engulfed in flames. I watched as ancient cities crumbled under the weight of unprecedented warfare. Jerusalem, the city of our heart, the city I had visited so many times, was surrounded by armies unlike anything in modern history. The Temple Mount, that sacred ground where our ancestors had worshipped for generations, was consumed by conflict as nations fought over its control. But this was not merely a political war. As I watched, I began to see the spiritual forces at work behind the physical conflict. Dark entities, beings of pure malevolence, were whispering into the ears of world leaders, filling them with pride, hatred, and an insatiable hunger for power. Every decision that led to escalation, every moment of diplomacy that failed, Every act of violence that begot more violence was being orchestrated by these forces of darkness. "Look closer," the Messiah said, and my vision focused on a particular scene. I saw a meeting room where men in expensive suits were signing documents. Above each of them hovered one of those dark entities, and I could hear their whispers clearly. They were not speaking in any earthly language, but somehow I understood every word. They were coordinating the final push toward global warfare, timing each conflict to create maximum chaos and despair. The second vision was even more disturbing. I saw technology being used in ways that chilled my soul. Artificial intelligence systems that could monitor every human conversation, track every movement, and predict every action were being deployed not for the betterment of humanity, but for its control. I watched as people's thoughts themselves became subject to manipulation through devices they willingly accepted into their lives. In this vision, I saw how freedom of religion, something I had fought to protect my entire life, was being systematically dismantled. Houses of worship were being monitored. Religious texts were being censored, and those who refused to conform to a new global spiritual system were being isolated from society. The persecution was not violent at first, but it was total. People simply found themselves unable to work, to shop, to travel, or to participate in any aspect of normal life if they refused to abandon their faith. But the most terrifying aspect of this vision was how willingly people accepted these changes. The technology was introduced as a convenience, the monitoring as protection, and the religious restrictions as necessary for global peace. Most people embraced these developments, believing they were steps toward a better world. Only a few recognized the spiritual slavery they represented. The third vision shook me to my very core. I saw the earth itself responding to the spiritual darkness that had been unleashed. Natural disasters struck with unprecedented frequency and intensity. Earthquakes leveled entire cities. Hurricanes devastated coastlines, and droughts brought famine to regions that had never experienced hunger. But these were not random acts of nature. They were the earth itself crying out against the evil that had been allowed to flourish. I watched as millions of people, faced with these catastrophes, turned not to God but to the very systems that had enslaved them. They begged their technological masters for salvation, pleaded with their political leaders for protection, and placed their faith in human solutions to problems that could only be solved through divine intervention. The more they trusted in human power, the more that power failed them, creating a cycle of despair that seemed impossible to break. Yet in the midst of all this darkness, I saw something that filled me with hope. Small groups of people scattered across the globe were gathering in secret to pray. These were not just Jews, but Christians, Muslims, and people of many different faiths who had recognized the spiritual nature of the crisis facing humanity. They had put aside their theological differences to unite in calling upon the one true God for mercy and intervention. What amazed me was the power these prayer gatherings generated. Every time they met, I could see the dark entities that had been influencing world events recoil, as if struck by lightning. The whispers that had been driving leaders toward war became quieter. The systems of control experienced mysterious failures, and the natural disasters lessened in intensity. It was as if the combined faith of these believers created a shield of protection around the areas where they lived. Rabbi David, the Messiah said, drawing my attention back to him, "This is why I have shown you these visions. The darkness you have witnessed is not inevitable. It is the result of choices, both spiritual and practical, that humanity will make in the coming year. But those choices can be influenced by the prayers and actions of those who understand what is truly at stake." He gestured, and suddenly I was standing in what appeared to be a vast library, the shelves stretched impossibly high, filled with books that seemed to glow with their own inner light. "These are the prayers of the faithful," he explained. "Every sincere prayer, every moment of genuine faith, every act of love performed in my name is recorded here. And these prayers have more power than you can imagine." I watched as he pulled one of the glowing books from the shelf and opened it. The pages were filled with names and dates, but also with something else. Each entry seemed to pulse with life, as if the prayers themselves were living things. When believers truly pray, not just reciting words but crying out from their hearts, they create ripples in the spiritual realm that can change the course of history. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a particular entry. This was a prayer offered by a simple housewife in Poland just before the Second World War. She had no political power, no wealth, no influence in the world's eyes. But her prayer for protection over her family created a shield that saved not just her household, but her entire neighborhood from the horrors that befell the rest of her city. He showed me entry after entry, demonstrating how the prayers of ordinary people throughout history had altered the course of events in ways they never knew. A farmer's prayer for rain had prevented a famine that would have killed thousands. A mother's prayer for her soldier son had caused a battle to end just before his unit would have been destroyed. A rabbi's prayer for understanding had inspired a scientific breakthrough that eased human suffering. But the most powerful prayers he showed me were those offered by groups of believers praying together with one heart and one mind. When people set aside their differences and united in calling upon God, their combined faith created a force that could literally move mountains. The dark entities that influenced world events had no defense against such unified prayer. "This is the key to surviving what is coming," he told me. "Individual faith is important, but collective prayer is essential. The believers must come together, not to debate theology or compare traditions, but to unite their hearts in calling upon the one true God for mercy and intervention." As he spoke, I began to understand why I had been chosen to receive this vision. Throughout my career, I had focused on the beautiful and unique traditions of Judaism, rather than what it shared with other faiths who worshiped the God of Abraham. But what I was being shown transcended those boundaries. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was calling all his children, from all traditions, to stand together. The vision began to shift again, and I found myself back in that place between worlds where I had first encountered the Messiah. But now I was not alone. Surrounding me were countless souls, people from every nation and every era of history. Some I recognized from my studies, great rabbis and teachers whose wisdom had shaped my understanding. Others were completely unknown to me, simple people whose faith had sustained them through trials I could barely imagine. "These are my faithful ones," the Messiah explained. "They have been preserved through every persecution, every disaster, every dark period in human history, because they understood that their hope was not in human systems but in divine providence. And now they are being prepared for the greatest test of all." One of the figures approached me, and I was shocked to recognize my own father, Rabbi Samuel Cohen, who had died when I was a young man. His face radiated a peace I had never seen during his earthly life, but his eyes held a deep concern. "David," he said, using the intimate tone he had used when I was a child, "what you have seen is not meant to frighten you, but to prepare you. The darkness coming will test every person's faith. But those who understand the true nature of the battle will be able to stand firm. You must return and warn the people, not just our Jewish brothers and sisters, but all who will listen." "But Father," I replied, "who will believe such a vision? How can I convince them of what I have seen when I can barely comprehend it myself?" He smiled, and in that smile I saw the wisdom of generations. "You do not need to convince anyone, my son. You simply need to be faithful in sharing what you have witnessed. The truth has its own power, and those who are ready to hear it will recognize it in their hearts." The scene around us began to fade, and I felt myself being drawn back toward my physical body. But before I returned, the Messiah placed his hand on my shoulder, and I felt a warmth that penetrated to the depths of my soul. "Remember, Rabbi David," he said, "what you have seen is not the end of the story. The darkness will be intense, but it will also be brief. Those who maintain their faith through the trials ahead will see the dawn of a new age, one where the kingdom of God is established on earth as it is in heaven. Your role is to help prepare people for both the darkness and the light that follows." Then I was back in my body, gasping for breath as the medical team worked frantically around me. The transition was jarring, like being pulled from a symphony concert into the middle of a construction site. My spirit, which had been soaring in dimensions beyond physical reality, was suddenly confined again to flesh and bone. The days that followed were the most difficult of my life. How do you return to normal rabbinical duties after experiencing such a profound revelation? How do you conduct routine services when you've seen the spiritual forces that will shape the immediate future? How do you counsel people about everyday problems when you know the extraordinary challenges that await? I tried to continue my regular responsibilities, but everything felt different. When I read from the Torah, I saw layers of meaning that had been hidden from me before. When I prayed, I was acutely aware of the spiritual realm that exists just beyond our physical perception. When I spoke with members of my congregation, I found myself wanting to warn them about what was coming, but struggling to find words that would not sound like the ravings of a madman. 3 weeks after my experience, I received confirmation that what I had seen was real. A news report described a secret meeting between world leaders that matched exactly what I had witnessed in my vision. The same type of room, the same type of participants, even the same type of documents being signed. But what the news report couldn't show was the spiritual dimension I had observed. The dark entities orchestrating events from beyond physical sight. That's when I knew I could no longer remain silent. The vision had not been a hallucination or a dream. It had been a genuine glimpse into the spiritual forces shaping our world, and I had been chosen to share that knowledge with others. The response to my first attempts at sharing this message was exactly what I had expected. My colleagues questioned my mental state, my congregation grew concerned about my fitness to lead, and my family worried that the heart attack had affected my judgment. But I also began to receive messages from people who had experienced similar visions, dreams, or spiritual encounters that confirmed what I had seen. A Christian pastor in America wrote to tell me about a prophetic dream that matched my vision of technological control. A Muslim imam in London described a spiritual experience that revealed the same dark entities I had witnessed. Even secular individuals, people with no particular religious background, began reaching out to share their own supernatural encounters that aligned with my testimony. What became clear was that God was not speaking through just one person or one tradition. He was raising up witnesses from every background, every faith, every nation to warn humanity about what is coming and to call people to prayer and repentance before it's too late. The urgency of this message cannot be overstated. As I record these words, we are already seeing the early signs of what I witnessed in my vision. Political tensions are escalating exactly as I was shown. Technological systems are being implemented that match what I saw, and natural disasters are increasing in both frequency and intensity. But more importantly, I am also seeing the response that offers hope. Prayer groups are forming spontaneously around the world. People are setting aside denominational differences to unite in calling upon God. And individuals are making the spiritual preparations necessary to stand firm in the trials ahead. The choice before each person watching this is simple but profound. You can dismiss this message as the delusion of a traumatized mind. Or you can consider the possibility that God is indeed warning humanity about the challenges ahead. You can continue living as if spiritual forces have no impact on world events. Or you can begin preparing yourself and your loved ones for the greatest test of faith in human history. For those who choose to take this warning seriously, I offer 3 specific recommendations. First, begin praying regularly and earnestly. Not just for your own needs, but for divine intervention in world events. The prayers of the faithful are literally the most powerful force available to counter the darkness that is being unleashed. Second, seek out others who share your faith and begin praying together. The unified prayers of believers create a spiritual shield that protects not just those who pray, but the communities around them. Find ways to bridge denominational and even religious boundaries in this effort, because the crisis ahead will require all sincere believers to stand together. Third, prepare yourself spiritually and practically for the challenges ahead. Study your faith deeply, strengthen your relationship with God, and make the practical preparations necessary to maintain your independence when the systems of control are implemented. But most importantly, prepare your heart to be a source of hope and strength for others who will be frightened and confused by the events to come. The darkness I witnessed in my vision is real, but it is not the end of the story. Those who maintain their faith through the trials ahead will see the establishment of God's kingdom on earth in ways that will far exceed anything they have imagined. The suffering will be intense but brief, and it will be followed by an age of peace and righteousness that will last for generations. This is Rabbi David Cohen, and I have shared with you the most important message of my life. The time for preparation is now, while there is still time to pray, to prepare, and to help others understand what is coming. May God give each of you the wisdom to discern the truth and the courage to act upon it before the time of testing arrives. As we've seen from other testimonies, the message is clear and urgent. The turmoil that could claim millions of lives doesn't have to happen, but it will require unprecedented unity and prayer across all faiths. The spiritual battle raging behind world events can only be countered through the power of prayer, fasting, and genuine repentance. Time is running short, but there is still hope if we act now and pray like the future of humanity depends on it.